Come on, hurry! Hurry! I don't want to be late! Senny yelled while dragging her friend along through the space station's crowded plaza. Can't you at least slow down a little? If I'd known we'd be running, I would have worn different shoes, Adnata retorted while trying to keep up with her manic Adnian friend. Eventually, the two of them found themselves in front of a doorway that had been crudely decorated with a pair of black bed sheets, some printed out pictures of cosmic monsters, as well as a large homemade banner that read, Gaia's Secret Children. I'm pretty sure you guys aren't allowed to just claim one of the station's rooms like that, Adnata informed her friend. Oh, come now. Half the station isn't in use right now, a station created at the behest of your uncle if memory serves me right. Plus, if they knew what we're doing here, they'd admonish us either way, so just relax for a change. Everything will be fine, you'll see. Senny tried to put her friend's mind at ease before lifting one of the bedsheets and dragging her inside. Once inside, Adnata was greeted by the sight of two Quizuins and another Inalis. The female Quizuin was writing something down on her communicator while the two guys were busy drawing a creature with a frightening amount of tentacles and teeth. Adnata was about to introduce herself when the female Quizuin looked up and jovially addressed her. Oh, shit! You're finally here! We were starting to think that Senny had either made you up or was selfishly keeping you all to herself. At which point, the two boys laid down their pencils and rushed over to go and greet their aspiring cult's newest member. After they'd all gotten the chance to introduce themselves, Senny took it upon herself to kick off this week's club meeting. She got up on one of the tables and began to address her fellow harbingers of doom. Mwahaha, good day everyone, and may the dark goddess watch over us, she said after donning a black cape with a comically large collar and laughing evilly. At which point the other members followed Senny's lead and began to dress up in manner that befits the supposed followers of Gaia. Adnata was glad she always brought her cardboard horns and fangs wherever she went. Otherwise, she'd sure look quite foolish right about now. Now then, Sonny started while grinning wickedly, seeing as we've got a new member joining us today, a new initiate who's ready to stand against those who defy us, another lost child who's ready to accept her place beneath the mistress of madness, the lady of lies, the dame of Destru. Yeah, get on with it already, would ya? Colette, the female Quizuine, interrupted her. As I was saying, my best friend Adnata is joining us today. At which point she made a little heart with her fingers at her. And to commemorate this joyous occasion, we will be feasting on the flesh of the innocent. Senny went and grabbed a platter she'd hidden in one of the room's empty closets before dropping it on the table she'd just stood on. In case you were wondering, yes, they contain the souls of our enemies, the Atnian proudly proclaimed with a mischievous giggle. Apparently, the would-be priestess and pastry chef had prepared what looked like moist, fleshy bread pudding, like buns covered in some sort of thick red sauce that obviously was meant to look like blood. The group looked kind of nervous, seeing as to their innocent herbivorous eyes, the clumsily made pastries looked somewhat like real meat. Wait a minute, didn't you make these with that fake meat recipe on the Gaian fan forum? I remember a couple posts on the hot page that showed off suspiciously similar treats. How about shush and cannibalize your lessers, my fellow spawn of destruction and chaos? Senny retorted while stuffing one of her desserts into the snitch's mouth. The 5 members of Gaia's cutest cult began to eat the strange yet delicious treats while casually talking among themselves. Each of them had at least 1 or 2 stories to tell about their supposed encounters with a cosmic horrors, after which they bonded over the way their parents would admonish them for being somewhat slightly obsessed with horror and the unknown. Although, to be fair, who wouldn't get bored with the stale, stagnant monotony of the known universe? Everything's safe, regulated, and micromanaged to the point where nothing exciting ever happens, or at least that's how things used to be. If there's anything they all agree on, it's that those Gaians would shake things up and finally change things for the better, which to them sounded like a dream come true. After all, being on the GA authoritative meant that the parents of these youngsters were at the very least pretty high up in the social hierarchy, which to each of them meant that, even more so than regular people, their lives were constantly being controlled, micromanaged, and made mind-numbingly boring without them being able to do anything about it. Something quickly proven by the sight of one of Senny's maids popping her head through the entrance's bedsheets. Upon seeing the 5 tiny would-be cultists eating what to her must have looked like flesh and blood, the stuffy-looking maid's expression instantly turned into one of confused shock. Her leathery skin turned increasingly pale as she threw up her hands as if to say, "I'm not even gonna bother with this shit." And she quickly power-walked the fuck out of there. The maid's expeditious retreat was accompanied by the sound of muffled giggles and laughter, as most of them were still in the middle of eating Senny's delicious pastries. Back on the GA Subtlety, the captain and his crew were busy barricading the bridge while waiting for the inevitable. Or at least the 20 or so who'd bothered to show up. Everyone else was undoubtedly either in their rooms, quietly sobbing and trying to accept their fate, or hiding somewhere in the hopes that the Gaians wouldn't find them. The captain had to admit, though, after one of the navigators had detected the Gaians' metallic abominations cruising towards us about an hour ago, he'd almost joined those cowardly fools in their prayers while hiding himself in the ship's cargo hold. Luckily for his mortal soul, his sense of duty managed to overtake his cold, calculating desire for survival. Even if his resolve had almost slipped, at least he wasn't one of the few sniveling traitors who'd instead decided to try and appease those abominations by praying to them and their petty excuse for a deity. Not long after, the captain was pulled from his thoughts by the chief security officer announcing the arrival of the Gaians. They'd jumped to their general location not too long ago and had now finally reached their vessel. Unfortunately for them, their backup generator would only power the most essential modules, which to these self-titled pacifists now meant that they had nothing to fire at the Gaians with. There was no doubt anymore, those things were hell-bent on destroying us. For the last 10 minutes leading up to their arrival, they'd sought fit to bombard our communication systems with all manner of strange signals and undecipherable madness. They were undoubtedly trying to somehow mess with our systems, or at the very least, our nerves. With only seconds to spare, the chief engineer finally managed to remotely overload one of the breakers responsible for keeping the lights on, which should give us at least a little bit more time. Not long after, we felt it. The entire ship shook. They'd somehow brute-forced themselves through one of the airlocks and were probably in the midst of boarding us as we speak. May the gods save us all. Fuck this, fuck that, fuck everything, and most importantly, fuck my life! Reka angrily hissed to herself while clumsily running around the ship's darkened hallways. Her indecisiveness had caused her to waste too much time looking for a suitable hiding spot, and now with no time left and the lights out, once again, she was forced to wander around looking for literally any place to hide. Eventually, she ended up wandering into the medbay just in time, as at the end of the hallway she could hear someone violently tearing open the doors to the medical ward. Hello? Anyone there? We picked up your distress signal. Is everything okay?" Reka nearly let out a scream as the cosmic entity's growls and grunts confirmed her worst fears, as well as re-emphasized how close she was to dying a horrific death, or worse. No doubt it was taunting and ridiculing her with what soon would be her fate, in the hopes she'd somehow understand its incomprehensible language. She quickly hid in one of the closets but left it slightly ajar. If she was about to die anyways, she at least wanted to know what this supposed harbinger of doom looked like. Of course, fate had sought fit to screw her over yet again, as the Gaian had apparently donned some sort of combat armor that covered its entire body. It was completely white sleek, and based on the sound of its footsteps, she guessed it was fairly heavy, even though the Gaian was walking around as if it weighed nothing. "Please don't find me, please don't find me," she softly prayed to herself while trying not to burst out in tears. It was slowly getting closer. Any second now it would open the closet doors and do unspeakable things to her. "Fuck it!" She couldn't take it anymore. She yelled before bursting out of her hiding spot like a space bat out of space hell. She tried to push past the armored giant, but almost immediately lost her footing and fell to the floor before trying to scramble away as quickly as possible, knocking over a couple trays holding surgical equipment in the process. The Gaian, on the other hand, let out a loud scream of his own and took a step back before tripping over a box full of medical supplies. As soon as the two frightened chucklefucks managed to somewhat come to their senses, they noticed that in their panicked state, they'd knocked over a lot of dangerous and sharp medical equipment. Like, for example, laser scalpels, dental drills, and other pointy surgical thingamabobs. Reika was the first to react, and with nothing left to lose, went on the offensive. She began by heroically and mercilessly pelting the Gaian with various pill bottles and crumpled-up doctor's note, to which the Gaian reacted by whipping her with an unwound bandage before grabbing a pillow from one of the nearby beds and throwing it at her face. It took an embarrassing 5 minutes for the both of them to realize that neither alien had any intention to harm the other, at which point the entire room was practically covered in enough scattered pills to make a junkie forever disavow the 5-second rule. After their valiant battle and an awkward silence, the Enowayan was the first to act. She wasn't sure why she did what she did, other than the fact that there was little else she could think of to do. But nevertheless, she stuck out her hand as if politely greeting an old friend, and to her astonishment, the Gaian seemed to know exactly what that meant, as it just as quickly reached out and interlocked her hand with his own. With amicable relations established, both creatures cautiously got up while making sure not to take their eyes off of each other. At which point Reika slowly took a few steps towards the door before sprinting away from there as quickly as possible. While this Gaian had seemed to be completely unlike what the holy texts had described, there was no way of knowing what its intentions were. For all she knew, it was just luring her into a false sense of security or an anomaly among its own kind. Either way, there was no way she was risking sticking around to find out.